Bine v-am găsit, vă spune din studio Alfa Omega TV. Vrem să vă propunem ca în această seară, pe spațiul emisiunii Calea Adevarul și Viata, să urmăriți împreună cu noi un talk show, o discuție mai deosebită realizată în urmă cu câteva zile în Parlamentul European. Ne propunem să vă ținem la curent cu ceea ce Dumnezeu face la acest nivel, la deciziile care se iau în acel loc legat de mersul lucrurilor în Europa, în Orientul Mijlociu, lucruri care, într-un fel, au de-a face cu viața politică a continentului din care facem și noi parte, dar care trebuie privite și abordate din perspectivă spirituală. Ne propunem ca aproximativ lunar, într-una din zilele săptămânii, să preluăm și să vă facem disponibil dumneavoastră seria aceasta de emisiuni sub genericul Raport european. Interviul este realizat și moderat de un cunoscut jurnalist de la Revelation TV din un canal de televiziune creștin englez. În emisiunea de astăzi, alături de un invitat permanent care o să revedeți în alte emisiuni, Thomas Sandel, președintele Coaliției Europene pentru Israel, o să-i aveți și să urmăriți pe doi dintre membrii Parlamentului European, Morten Messerschmidt și Paolo Cesaca. Subiectul discuției din această emisiune este legat de reașezarea scenei politice în Orientul Mijlociu, de acorduri, de înțelegeri vis-a-vis de Iran, Statele Unite. Un subiect interesant și cred eu pentru prima dată dumneavoastră o să fiți conectați cu modul, nivelul și abordarea specifică Parlamentului European în ceea ce privește lucruri cu conotație spirituală importantă. Așadar, astăzi deschidem pentru dumneavoastră spațiul de discuții talk show în acest loc al canalului Alfa Omega TV pentru o discuție lunar, zicem noi, sub genericul Raport european. Dumnezeu să vă binecuvânteze!
Hello and welcome to another edition of the European Report. Here we are once again in the European Parliament, which is in the heart of the European Union. And in today's programme, we'll be discussing the potential deal that the West has agreed with Iran over its controversial nuclear weapons programme. And we'll be asking, is this peace in our time, or will this deal lead to more sinister developments as time goes on? So in today's programme, I'm joined by Thomas Sandel, the founder and director of the European Coalition for Israel. So welcome to the European Report. I also have Morten Messerschmidt, Danish MEP. Messerschmidt, sorry. Yes. Morten Messerschmidt, Danish MEP, and Paolo Casaca, so former Portuguese MEP and also expert on Iran and security issues. Firstly, Morten, I'll start off with you because can you share something about your background and your rise to politics in Denmark, and how did you get involved in the political process?
Well, I was elected actually 10 years ago for the Danish Parliament and then served 5 years there almost. And then 2009, I changed Parliament, so to speak, and was elected for the European Parliament. And one of the issues that has always been important for me is the relationships with Israel, of course, from Denmark, but also from the European Union perspective. And I think in 2004, so even before I was elected, I was invited by an organization called Thanks for Scandinavia to visit Israel, which really opened my eyes for the close bonds between Israel and Europe, and Denmark, but also the need for a revised view on the situation in Israel. I think many of the members in this House have an entirely screwed idea of what's actually the realities in the Middle East.
And how do we communicate the true realities of the Middle East, and also to bring sympathy towards Israel's situation?
Well, that is basically what we should do, just tell the facts. I think one of the only things that's really been successful in the Palestinian Authority is the propaganda, which so often is successful based on a very emotional basis. What I would like is that we could be equally emotionally engaged defending the Israeli case. Not to say that everything Israel does is right, but at least to have a more neutral approach to it from all political sides.
No, absolutely. And Thomas, it's great to have you back on the programme. So can you share with us some of the diplomatic activities that you've been involved in recent months?
Well, thank you, Simon. It's always good to be back and good to be back in such good company with Messerschmidt and Paolo Casaca. We were in New York just before Easter, where we were hosting a luncheon in preparation or in honor of the Jewish Passover. And it's interesting to see at the UN, where Israel would be considered to be very isolated, that we could have a full house meaning 35 UN missions represented, just to honor the Jewish people and to contemplate on the message of the Jewish Passover, which is a universal message of freedom from slavery.
Absolutely.
And it also proves, I think, the point that if we try to move away from the conflict, if we try to use what we sometimes call soft diplomacy, there are many more friends of Israel in the international community than we would think. So for us, again, this was a very encouraging experience, and it gives us a lot of confidence to continue the work both here in the European Parliament, European Union, but also at the UN.
Yeah. And Paolo, the work you do is so important and so vital. So can you share with us some of the important research that you've been involved in lately and some of the very important work that you've been doing regarding security issues?
Well, both in SADF and in Arch Humankind, I have been following closely this sort of rehearsal of the peace in our lifetime that we have been offered to. And I think that we must do the utmost to call the attention people to be rational, to think thoroughly on what is going in front of us, and to be able to prevent what I foresee as a major disaster if we do not change course. I do think that Prime Minister Netanyahu was absolutely right in every word he said to the United States Congress. I think that it is really unbelievable that the leader of the most important country in the world dares to make a full presentation of an agreement that actually does not exist. There is only an empty declaration, very softly presented and really very empty of any content. And then there is the Iranian authority saying, well, the agreement is that we are going to do whatever we want. And the United States president that claims a lot of things that might exist somewhere in some papers, but that were never agreed, and that actually transform completely the situation from a negotiation on preventing proliferation to a clear invitation to Iran, and not only to Iran, to the rest of the world, for proliferation. In his own words, President Obama says, well, they will not do it in certain years. If it means that they are allowed to do it in certain years in his own interpretation, this is an invitation to disaster to the whole of the world. And I think Mr. Kissinger made tremendously important analysis of this. One might think whatever want of Mr. Kissinger, but his book that he made last year and his declarations on this agreement are vital to understand what we are facing.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And before we discuss the Iranian nuclear issue, I very much want to send our shock. When we saw the horrendous terrorist attack in Copenhagen, Morten, it shocked us, and our hearts went out to the Danish people that such a horrible attack could happen to your nation. How is your brave and courageous nation coming to terms with that dreadful terrorist attack we saw back in February?
Well, first, thank you for the sympathy. I really appreciate the words. As you said, it came as a shock, but I think most had the feeling that, in some sense, it wasn't a thing that was just going to happen, because we have seen that in some of the extreme Muslim communities there are people who have the sympathy of the terrorist movements around in the world, and do find that Denmark as a country, but also specific entities of Denmark, like Jyllandsposten and others, are legal aims to attack, because of the very strong defense on various freedom rights, so the freedom of speech and so on. And it's led to a discussion, of course, in Denmark, sadly, but not surprisingly, whether it's worth it to defend these rights. And I think it is. And in this sense, I think that we're all in the, I would say, Judeo-Christian civilization, what we normally refer to as the West, should have a pledge not ever to give in on these people. And I think it would be sensible if somebody from the Muslim community would distance themselves more clearly to the terrorists coming from whatever minority groups. There is a tendency for many to say that this has nothing to do with Islam. And I'm quite sure that I know that the vast majority of Muslims, of course, in the world are peaceful and peace-loving people. It's not my point. The point is that just as the Inquisition was a horrible part of Christianity, we need to realize that the Islamic terrorism is a part of Islam. And we cannot minorize that, we cannot distance ourselves from that if the Muslim communities don't want to do that. And that would be a huge step forward, which I hope inevitably will come out of this terror attack in Denmark, so that we can isolate these people and hopefully, in the end of whatever time, avoid that to happen again.
Yeah, let's hope so. And Thomas, I know that the EU announced they were setting up a task force to tackle the issue of anti-Semitism. In the terms of where are we with this EU task force to tackle anti-Semitism? Does it have teeth? Will it tackle the very, very difficult issues in Europe as it relates to anti-Semitism? And will this ultimately mean that the Jewish community here in Europe will feel more protected?
Simon, I'm sorry to be disappointed in saying that I don't have very high hopes of this task force. As you know, at this stage, it's only an idea. The reason why I say I'm not very hopeful is that when I see the European institutions trying to make sense of what happened in Paris and Copenhagen, the language that they use clearly illustrates that they haven't been able to identify the problem. So ECI was one of the organizations that were pressing the European Commission to organize a crisis summit to discuss the rise of anti-Semitism in Europe and also to, I would say, the radicalization of Islam. And as a consequence, what happened in Copenhagen and in Paris. But there was a conference just 2 weeks ago. There is a summit expected in October. But when you look at the language, it talks about the threat of radicalization, the threat of fundamentalism, and the need for religious dialogue. There's nowhere in the text the identifying the real threats, anti-Semitism, but also, and I think we should be, in an open society, we should be free to discuss also the problems with Islam today, that what we've seen in Paris, in Brussels, in Toulouse, in Copenhagen, in the list goes on, Kenya, Somalia, the list goes on, has something to do with Islam. That is not to demonize a people group, and I think, but if we don't discuss this openly, what we may see as a backlash is that people will take out their anger on the people, as Morten said, you know, who are to 95% peaceful people who are doing their daily jobs and are contributing to our European societies. So my point is really that we need, in an open society, dare to call a spade a spade. The discussion can still be very nuanced, but we can't, you know, turn a blind eye to what is happening in our societies.
Absolutely. And Paolo, I mean, if you consider how many young, impressionable European Muslims have actually gone and joined the Islamic State recently, both in Iraq and Syria, and the fact that their success is breeding more and more of these jihadists who are then coming back to Europe, do you think enough is being done to tackle this problem of jihadis returning from Syria or Iraq to Europe that poses a direct threat to European security?
This is a crucial issue. I think that we have to understand that jihadism as an ideology is the problem. And this cannot continue to be forbidden words as they are in the United States. President Obama, actually, he has gone further than most of the already, the political correctness of some people in Europe, and forbid to tackle the problem is this ideology. And this ideology is allowed to continue on a variety of completely false arguments that it is actually there is only a problem of radicalization. I really do not understand how can you speak of a problem of radicalization. I mean, as you know, there are respectable political parties in Europe, both in Italy and France, that use the name radical, and to be radical is, for instance, to be very emotive on defending, for instance, freedom or democracy. I mean, I see no way of describing it as radicalism to think that you have to cut the throat of whoever does not think the way you do. This is completely, why should we describe this as radicalization? It is completely nonsense. There is no strategy to go against jihadism. Jihadism is allowed to prosper, and I think that in Europe, actually, your United Kingdom is one of the most concerning countries where the most outrageous jihadists are allowed to preach the very violent actions. And this is the source of the issue. We have to understand that the anti-Semitism is a brand of a lot of totalitarian ideologies like Nazism, like jihadism, and it is the most sensitive issue. But it goes after the Jews are taken care of. They don't stop there.
Yep. Morten, I want to bring you on this one. Do you think enough's been done to protect European Jewry, particularly in light of what happened in Copenhagen?
Certainly not. The terror attack in Copenhagen was just another attack in the row, as Thomas mentioned, here in Brussels, where we're sitting now, in all over the continent. This has been happening, and it's like the responsible politicians or our police authorities have been living in some fairy tale dream that they would never come to the next place. The question now, of course, is where is the next place? And I think it's horrendous to see how little focus there is on this. I fear that the reason is that if we begin to realize the real threat on Jews in Europe, it'll be inevitable for the same politicians also to realize that this is just what the Jews in Israel are living with every day. And they don't want to do that link because it's so politically incorrect to be defensive to Israel as such. But it's awful. I mean, I fully understood. I was very sad, but I fully understood when Netanyahu said that he would suggest for Jews in Europe to come back to Israel. I hate that idea because I want Jews to be a part of the European society and the member states in EU. But given the daily threat, going to school, going to your jobs, doing your shopping in the average kosher supermarket, whatever, I understand why many people must think so, and it's a total neglect of the obligations of the European countries.
Next issue we're going to talk about, Thomas, is the re-election of the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. It's gone down very well with a lot of Christian Zionist audiences, but I don't think his re-election has gone down too well here and also amongst the European Commission and EU member state leaders. What is their reaction to his re-election?
Well, first of all, I should quote myself in what I wrote in our in our monthly report to say, well, we congratulate the Israeli people to their elections, because what distinguishes Israel from any other neighbor or any other country in that region is that they have free and open elections. And we should always cherish this idea of parliamentary democracy. And one way of honoring and respecting parliamentary democracy is also that you respect the results. Absolutely. So, and I think here we have had a problem in Europe, and I would say, broadly speaking, the international community, that there was such a clear campaigning against the current government to be re-elected. And of course, we can have our differences on certain topics, but I think when it comes to respecting national sovereignty, the electorate process in a clearly democratic state, I don't want Denmark to interfere in the elections in Finland or Portugal in Denmark. And if we cannot hold these values as precious and untouchable, I think we have a real problem. So our point is always to say we will work with any Israeli government that is elected democratically. We're not trying to pick and say, well, this is our favorite government, but I am concerned when I see also in this House and in the institutions in Brussels the pressure that has been on the current government, basically to say that, well, if you choose another government, you know, we will work with you, we will make life more easy for you. And I think this is very disrespectful, and as a European citizen, I'm really raising my concern about this.
And Paolo, what's your reaction to the re-election of the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, and why is there so much hostility towards his election when he's one of the very few leaders in the Western world who has moral clarity and moral purpose?
Well, Thomas is absolutely right to start with, but secondly, I think that this appeasement ideology is taking care of the West, and they think that if they appease the monster will start to behave well. And history has proved time and time again that this is not true. But what is the most dramatic thing is that even those countries that used to be very much anti-Israel in the Arab world, now they understand that this is not of their interest anymore. In many instances, we are seeing President Obama and this really radical European, radical anti-Zionist public opinion and political leadership in Europe to be more against Israel than the Arab world. The Arab world understands much better what is going on. The Arab world, that is certainly not an example for democracy, and that really where a lot of the problems have been growing from, well, they confronted with the facts. They know that Iran is using the anti-Semitism as a banner to make its expansion. As it was also the case with Hitler, by the way. He did not want to only to finish up with Jews. He wanted to go much further, as we know. And this is exactly the same thing. And they are starting to understand this. But this leadership in the West does not get it. It's not getting there. Is completely alien to reality, and is is unable to understand the things at their own dimension. And why do you, for instance, now this issue of the outskirts of Damascus, where the Palestinians were slaughtered by ISIS from one side and the Assad forces from the other, Yarmouk. I mean, it's a case in point. I mean, there was absolutely no action whatsoever from all of those that made flotillas, that have been promoting boycott of Israel, that have been doing their utmost. There was no reaction. So, of course, the issue is not Palestine, is not that there are rights that might not be defended. No, the issue is to go against Israel. And actually, it is more than that. It is because it is to allow jihadists to fulfill their aims. This is what the issue is. And we have to go against it.
And Morten, I want to very much bring you on board on this one. Why is it the impression that European legislators only really see Israel in terms of its conflict with the Palestinians and don't see Israel for the vibrant democracy it is, and the fact that Israel is actually a beacon of light in the region, and that Israel should be used as the model example of how the Arab states and other other Middle East states should behave and conduct themselves with parliamentary democracy, freedom of speech?
It actually does surprise me, because there's been a change, I think, for the past, say, 25 years or so. And it very much, I think, comes from the media. That has a specific agenda. Then you could ask, why is that? And I wouldn't really have a good answer. I can just tell it from various European media. It's French, British, Danish, whatever, Portuguese, and it's sort of the first assumption of anything coming from this region is that the Palestinians are the suppressed and the Jews and Israelis are the oppressor. And what needs to be done about it is, I think Thomas is right about the soft diplomacy. Try to explain, try to bring legislators and opinion makers and debates and so into Israel and actually show what are the realities. Of course, it's not very helpful when you have an administration in Washington which is so ambiguous about Israel, much more than we've ever seen before. That sort of legitimizes, I think, even the unfair critique. So basically there is just to do what we are doing right now and try to explain what is the balanced appeal.
And of course, I suppose the biggest news story that's occurred this month is this interim agreement that the 5+1 nations have made, which is the 5 permanent members of the UN Security Council with the Iranian regime over its nuclear weapons program. And it's my observations only, but all this agreement has done is actually bought time. It hasn't stopped the enrichment of uranium needed to produce a nuclear weapon. And according to security experts, under this agreement, Iran could still achieve nuclear breakout in 9 months' time. And European leaders are very happy to embrace this agreement. What do you think are the dangers of this agreement, or do you think this is actually a good agreement the West has reached with Iran?
I just say that this agreement, as I read it, if it's at all an agreement, I would rather see some sort of attempted common understanding or whatever it is. This is not really about Iran or Europe or whatever. This is about the time running out for Mr. Obama, having not delivered any of his international priorities when the time he's been the president. So if he just needs one excuse to say, this at least I did, when he's out of the White House, and this is going to be it. So his approach to this was, I just want to have a deal irrespective of the content of it. And there we are, that's what we have. I'm very much concerned about it. I think the lifting of the sanctions is going way too quickly against Iran. I very much fear the inherent trust to the Iranian regime, which is built in here in the expectations of the nuclear facilities and these things. I basically don't think we can trust the regime in Tehran. Paolo made reference before to Nazism. I think what we 60 years ago fought in Europe against in Germany has many similarities to the regime in Tehran, and we all know what happened when a certain leader said peace in our time with the regime in Berlin. And I fear that we will end up with somewhat the same here with Tehran. That Tehran already now interpreting this understanding very differently from what we hear in America, emphasizing the obvious lack of content, real content, will only benefit from this. It'll buy them time to pursue the real goal they have, which everybody knows is, in relation to Israel, a total distinction of the Israeli state. And we should never allow that. We should intensify the pressure on Tehran and do whatever we can in order to weaken them.
Yeah, and Paolo, I have to bring you on this one as our Iranian expert. No doubt you're going to be very scathing of this deal, so really just break down what this deal consists of and why this is bad news, not only for Israel but also for the West as well.
Well, I think that Prime Minister Netanyahu is absolutely right when saying that no negotiations can be done without contemplating three aspects of three issues at the same time, which are, of course, the nuclear issue, secondly, freedom and democracy within Iran, and thirdly, the end of the Iranian expansionism. These three issues are absolutely interlinked, and the good agreement because, of course, I don't think that we should not negotiate. Of course, we can negotiate, but we have to negotiate on the basis of what United Nations decided. We are not going to negotiate on the non-proliferation. We are not going to, should not negotiate on inspections, on principles that are absolutely enshrined in the international community practice. We shall not negotiate to completely undermine the agreements on non-proliferation. We have to negotiate saying, well, these United Nations decisions are clear, and now the question is how you are going to implement it at the same time as you stop your expansionism and you open up society within Iran. The effect, I think that the first impact of this agreement was exactly the ease at which Iran intervened more openly in Yemen. This was, for Iran, the interpretation of this declaration was, we have a green light for going more aggressively in Yemen. And they will do it in Yemen as they will do everywhere else. I have been convinced for a very long time that tactically the objective of the Iranian regime is actually Saudi Arabia, because Saudi Arabia is the great competitor. Saudi Arabia is the key for the oil and gas of the whole of the Gulf, and this is the most important at the world level. And if they can squeeze Saudi Arabia from the fermenting Shia movement, because we shall not forget that in cultural and in religious terms there is really no border between Yemen and Saudi Arabia. The Shia communities are prolonged in Saudi Arabia in this area, as they are on the other side from Iraq to the eastern side of Saudi Arabia. So they are actually trying to squeeze Saudi Arabia between ISIS and the Shia the Shia movements that they are sponsored. If they happen to liquidate Saudi Arabia, the impact will be tremendous, will be enough. That's what they want. I think that they want to keep the flag of anti-Semitism going on, because they will always justify this as a way to destroy a regime that was now cooperating with the Zionism and imperialism and whatever. But that's what they are aiming at. This is the question of the moment, and the blindness of the United States presidency on this is really absolutely difficult to understand.
Yeah. Morten, I know you've got to leave, but can I just ask you with just one last question before you've got to go off to important parliamentary business. Isn't one of the major problems, particularly in the United States and also here in the EU, is this new political philosophy that underpins the very foundations, European foundations, and that is the belief in soft power, the belief in diplomacy and engagement will actually work and get results. But isn't there a great danger with this agreement that we're actually empowering the world's most dangerous regime with the world's most dangerous weapons?
Well, soft power certainly has its place. It's not that you cannot exclude it at all. That's not the case. But dealing with a regime like the one in Tehran, it should. I don't think it really has its place, and certainly it's not a one-way street. I mean, you could only do it if you have the ultimate threat as well, pressing these people. The regime in Tehran are not rational politicians that look at the world from a open perspective. What are their best alternatives? They are extremely ideologically focused on their ambitions, religiously and strategically in the Middle East, and there Israel is a huge issue for them. So I very much regret that that DC had made this change towards a only focusing on the soft possibilities, and this deal, or whatever you'd call it, emphasizes that it was a wrong path to take. we should have, I think, intensified the sanctions, made it even harder for the Iranian regime to keep up their economy and thereby create a break, like we've done with other evil empires, the Soviet bloc, for instance. I'm not saying that it's going to be easy or it will be a swift solution, but compared to this, which is going in the wrong direction, it will certainly be preferable.
Morten, thank you so much for being my guest on the European
I'm sorry that
Report.
I have to leave you. As you said, I have other obligations. Thank you very much. All right, great. Thomas.
Thank you.
Yes.
Okay, pleasure to see you. There we have Morten Messerschmidt had to leave on parliamentary business, so we're going to continue this discussion on Iran. I suppose many in Israel and many conservative voices, Thomas, have been probably alarmed at this deal, and there's a resemblance to Neville Chamberlain's agreement with Hitler in November 1938, in which he declared peace in our time. Historically, do you believe that we are repeating the same mistakes as in the 1930s with the Iranian regime?
Well, I think the inclination for all of us, being political leaders or not, and especially if you're a responsible political leader, is of course caution. Also, you want to avoid confrontation at any cost, almost any cost. But as Paolo and I think Morten said as well, I think what we've seen over the years in our Western society is a sense of growing appeasement. Is like there's not really anything worth defending anymore. So, and this is where it becomes dangerous, and it's a slippery slope where we say, you know, peace at any cost. What we've said repeatedly over the last 3 years, more or less, as we've been discussing this issue, is to say that from the EU side, it should be clearly stated always that every option are on the table. We should never rule out. And I think that's one of the strategic mistakes that the negotiating team did on our side, to basically make it very clear we want to deal at any cost. We want to bring in Iran again into the international community. And it wasn't a clear message to say that, listen, you know, we won't compromise, we will make sure that this deal will work regardless of what the costs are. So again, it has been said many times over the last few weeks that you know, we cannot but think of what happened in 1938, and again, these are times when I think, and I would be so happy if I'm mistaken and if I'm completely wrong, but I think we don't have the luxury of being naive. And I am sharing the concern with Paolo and others that this is a bad deal. It's not an agreement, it's more a disagreement. And I think obviously the next few months will be very critical as to will this be a signed deal and what will the final deal look like.
Paolo, I mean, security experts have really warned, with this deal in particular, that this still leaves Iran enough uranium to enrich that will actually produce a nuclear bomb, possibly Iran reaching nuclear breakout, meaning they have nuclear weapons in about 9 months' time. In your opinion, what are the implications for the Middle East and the world if Iran reaches nuclear breakout, say, in 9 months' time?
Well, Simon, if you allow me just a word on this soft power issue.
Yeah,
I think soft power is fundamental. But soft power is to bring the Iranian people into the equation, to support the Iranian people, is to say, for instance, that what the regime did immediately after the announcement of the agreement, which was, you know, dozens and dozens of executions in the Iranian prisons, that this is absolutely unacceptable. This is the soft power. The soft power, of course, is not to be nice to Mr. Khamenei, thinking that Mr. Khamenei will stop crying death to America in his sermons on Friday, because he will not. This is not soft power. This is a foolishness. Soft power is something completely different, and it is fundamental, and it should be used, and it has not been used. getting back to this issue, I think that it's very interesting that we do not have any declaration from the Vienna Atomic Agency. This is because for Vienna it is it is absolutely unquestionable that it is impossible to see any agreement if you do not start by confessing what you did in the past. I mean, if you cannot review the program, the arms program that you did in the past, and Iran refuses completely to confess whatever. Iran refuses completely to have an open overseeing of what they are doing. And so the basic conditions that have been used for decades are not in reach. And so for Vienna, it's clear that it's not possible. If ever there will be somebody in Vienna that will say yes, it is completely contrary to all of the doctrine, all of the actions that they have been pursuing for decades, because they are very conscious that what Mr. Obama is doing is to say yes to proliferation. And we saw it immediately. Saudi Arabia more or less openly said to Pakistan, well, this is the time now. I mean, we have been supplying you with money and funds so many times, so please now the bomb we want to get into the want to get in there, and it's absolutely clear that all the other powers that have ambiguous ambitions like Turkey will obviously claim the same thing. This is not only the disaster is much bigger than Iran. It is a world disaster. It is to cripple the system that has avoided a nuclear disaster at the global scale. And I think that all of us, we should be conscious of this. When we hear a State Department spokesman referring to Henry Kissinger, well, he has big thoughts. Well, and when he says that, he is not praising. He's not praising Mr. Kissinger. This is a criticism. That Mr. Kissinger has thoughts. We see what is the line of argument. I mean, don't think, don't reason. Irrationality is the case in point. And just go with the mood. Just pretend. Just let your imagination flow. This is the most dangerous message that the political establishment can make. No, that's not the way to act. The way to act is to be realistic. Of course, to make negotiations, obviously, yes. And to use soft power, of course, yes. To say that the alternative is to bomb Iran, we have to understand that this is the reverse. This type of appeasement is an invitation for Iran to step up its expansionist agenda and really increases dramatically the possibilities of conflict, as it did with Hitler. As a matter of fact, I think that I mean, it's very difficult to rewrite history and to think what would he do. But no, I think there is no question to no one that Mr. Chamberlain made a very big incentive for the expansionist agenda of Adolf Hitler with his famous agreement.
Yeah, and Thomas, we saw last month the Israeli Prime Minister addressed both houses of Congress in the States, warning that this was a bad deal, trying to get congressional support in opposition to this interim agreement that the United States has been instrumental in signing with the Iranian regime. And in response, according to my notes here, the Obama administration decided to declassify a top secret 386-page Department of Defense document that dates back from 1987, dealing with Iran's nuclear weapons program. According to my notes here, the first time Israel's alleged nuclear weapon program has ever been officially and publicly referred to by the US authorities. In the declassified document, the Pentagon reveals supposed details about Israel's defense deterrent capabilities, but kept sections on France, Germany and Italy classified. These sections were blacked out in the document. What does this say about the Obama's administration's eagerness to endanger Israel's security in going ahead with this deal?
Well, I will comment quite briefly on the U.S. administration and then go to a point which I find fundamentally very important here. But I mean, it's clear to everyone, and we've said it in the program, that what may be different in this situation from many years back is that we don't have a strong ally in Washington anymore. And I think there were many administrations, being Republican or Democrat, where you could always count that there was a solid line of support for Israel, regardless of party affiliation. And I think this is still the case when you look at the Congress and when you look at the opposition, even to the deal which we have right now. So, but when it comes to President Obama, there's something very irrational behavior. I cannot analyze. I think you need to be a psychologist to really read the mind of this man. But I'm obviously worried. What I wanted to come back to is a slightly different perspective, but it still, I think, relates to the parameter of this deal. We are looking at a state here which is not only completely repressive to its own population, and as Paolo mentioned here about the killing of its own population, but it's also a regime which still refuses to accept the fact that Israel has a right to exist. How can you even start negotiations with a state that doesn't apply the most fundamental principles in international relations, being a member state of the United Nations? Obviously, and I think rightfully, the Israeli administration, they raised this level and said, well, can't we bring this into a deal at least to show some goodwill from the Iranian side and say, well, we recognize the right for Israel to exist? No, it was non-negotiable. And I think this should raise a flag to anyone who are studying the deal to say, well, if you can't even, you can disagree and you can still criticize this Jewish state, but you don't even accept the fact that it exists and it has a right to exist. This brings us back, of course, to 1938, with the same reluctance to accept the Jewish people at that time of being part of our European societies. But still, it's like one of those things you don't want to hear, you don't want to read it, you don't want to see it. But I think, we are fooling ourselves if we can't even agree on the most basic fundamental values there are in international relations, the right to accept the existence of fellow UN member state. So here, this is for me the fundamental problem. And I don't think that this has been raised sufficiently in the debate. And I think it's high time also in this House that someone will speak up and make this point very clear.
I think one person has made this point very clear, and that's one of the Republican presidential candidates who has actually declared that essentially that we should not go ahead, the West should not go ahead with this deal with Iran until the Iranian regime recognizes Israel's right to exist.
Could I even mention the fact that when it comes to Lausanne and Lake Geneva, there are two interesting historical parallels that I think we can look at. In 1938, we often come back to 1938. What happened in July in 1938 in Evian, on the other side from Lausanne, there was this famous conference called Together by Roosevelt, and it was one of these big questions at the time. Well, what shall we do with the Jewish refugees which are stuck in Austria and occupied, in Germany and occupied Austria? And again, you had the whole international community together. They refused to see what was going on. They refused to confront Hitler in any way. But even worse, they were not able to lend a helping hand and receive these poor refugees. It happened in Evian. What happened in Lausanne in the early 1920s, we should remember this. This was the first time when the Mandate for Palestine was signed into the League of Nations, which clearly said that the Jewish people had a right to their own state. And now in Lausanne, we have a deal which basically is trying to dispute this fact and go back again 90 years and say, no, this is not any longer something that we have to honor. And again, these are things we have to remind our leaders about.
An interesting point to bring in, Paulo, on this one is that Israel's former intelligence chief, Amos Yadlin, has warned that if Iran's uranium is not exported and as part of this agreement, then they will achieve nuclear weapons. Isn't this time for the Western world to wake up and our diplomats, our leaders, to understand the implications of what they're doing?
Well, perhaps still referring to this issue of the United States, there is this saying attributed to Churchill that basically says, well, we can always trust the United States to do the right thing after exhausting all other possible courses of action. And I think this is my belief. I do trust the United States as perhaps no other country in the world, I have to say. I think in the end, I don't know how, if it's going to be the presidential election, I don't know how. But I do believe that United States democracy will be sufficiently robust to have an answer and will not allow disaster to happen. But regarding, the technical issues, well, of course that if the Iran keeps its enriching capacity and actually increases it, because the interpretation that was made by the Iranian negotiators was that not only they could keep their old enrichment capacity, but they could increase it through using the modern and more sophisticated uranium enriching machines. And of course, if it will also, if they will not have to export this enriched uranium, they will be much closer. I mean, they are going step after step on the missile part of the issue, which is a fundamental part of the nuclear program. On the weaponization, we do believe that they are working on it. So, of course, that the danger is there. But we have to see that in perspective. We have to see, because we have been confronted with this perspective. While, Israel, these unclassified documents. Well, Israel's the bomb. Why not this? It's not something like you go to the recreation. Well, this kid has already this toy. Why the other kids should not have the toy as well? Things are not at all like that. We have a country that is using these weapons to prevent its own annihilations for very clear and obvious reasons from one side. And on the other, we have a country where even the so-called moderate Rafsanjani said, well, what's the problem? If we make an exchange of nuclear war missiles, Iran with less 5 million people, that's not a problem. But Israel with less 5 million people will cease to exist. And this has been said openly. And this is what they think. Yeah. So this is exactly what we cannot accept. The weapons, the weapons do not kill people. People kill people with weapons. Yeah. We have to understand this.
Yeah. And Thomas, we're down to the last 4 minutes of the programme. I suppose the one thing we have to really raise with this issue is the fact that not only do the Gulf states, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, for example, feel very threatened and concerned with Iran's nuclear weapons. We even had a leading Egyptian TV personality this week has come out and said that he supports Netanyahu, that Netanyahu should trust in God and bomb Iran. Incredible statements coming from an Egyptian TV personality. But on a more serious note, isn't there a great threat to European security because Iran has ballistic continental missiles that are capable of reaching Europe, and particularly if they're able to put a nuclear warhead on these missiles, means that the Iranian regime acquiring nuclear weapons is a direct security threat to European security?
I think the answer is obvious, yes. And it still puzzles me why there's not a greater concern in Europe, and the focus seems to be on Israel. And again, Israel is, like Prime Minister Asna said, it's this nation out there fighting our fight, because, you know, this should be more than anything else a European concern. And we should be standing up for our values and the fact that we should be able to live in peace and security. So yes, I don't know. Another thing, and I'd almost like to turn back to Paola, I mean, when we look at the Iranian threat again, and sometimes we were discussing comparing it to the situation in the Cold War with Soviet Union, and we said, well, are there similarities? And I think I said at that time that the situation is very different, because even the Soviet communists, they did not have this cult of suicide, where they would say that losing 4 million people was not such a bad thing if you could, you know, at the same time kill your enemy. But here we have an apocalyptic religious cult. And my question is really, and if we have time, even to Paola representing a little bit more a political class in Europe, are the leaders actually, do they understand the mindset of the people in Tehran?
You've got a minute.
You got a minute.
No, I don't think we do understand their mindset.
Yeah.
This is the problem. We do not understand jihadism. We don't study the history of Iran, for instance. No, everybody says a lot of nonsense on the history of Iran on the 20th century, and this is the major problem. These leaders, these jihadis, they have their own rationality. But that's a rationality that is an assassin rationality. Hitler was rational as well, as at his own way. You know, he had his own type of rationality, and that we have to understand this. If we don't understand it, we are in for a very rough ride.
No, and Thomas, do you want the final say in 30 seconds why this is such a crucial, important issue?
No, I think, again, as many of the viewers are Christians, and we know that in Europe we've failed the Jewish people so many times before, and sometimes just to make sure that we could have a good life, we didn't want to step up and stand by their side. And I think this is really a time where we need to stand by the Jewish people in Europe with the rise of anti-Semitism, but also with the Jewish state when they are facing an existential threat again.
And gentlemen, thank you so much for being my guests on this edition of the European Report. And I want to thank you all for watching this programme here from the European Parliament on such a crucial issue as this potential deal that the West could negotiate with Iran. It's important to remember that the Iranian regime is the world's most dangerous regime, and will the West allow them to have the world's most dangerous weapons? We hope not, and we certainly pray that this won't happen. So thank you for watching today's European Report from the European Parliament.